that don't get their own focus, right? One of those weeks or one of those Torah portions is this one. This one is usually doubled up with the Torah portion that precedes it. And generally, people, when you have to pick one to focus on, you pick the one that you can encounter first. So usually the first of the two of the doubled Torah portions gets the limelight and the focus. So this Torah portion, Kedoshim, usually does not get its due focus and attention, which is a pity, because you would be hard pressed to find a Torah portion with more of the kind of foundational principles of Judaism than Parshat Kedoshim. For example, there are the three words that many consider, including Rabbi Akiva, the most important words in the entire Torah. Anybody know which three words I am referring to?
Kedoshim.
Very good. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha.
Oh yeah.
V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is in this week's Torah portion, in the Parshat Kedoshim, and it's just among a list of a whole bunch of directives that are that fundamental, including Ish Imo v'Aviv Tiro, that a person should have awe, respect for their parents, Tzedek, Avnei Tzedek, Hin Tzedek, that people should have proper weights and measures when doing business. So many fundamental principles of Jewish morality and Jewish sanctity is in this week's Torah portion. And as I said, oftentimes it gets missed because last week's Torah portion is also quite tremendous in the fact that it is on the aftermath of the dramatic story of the two sons of Aaron, is discussion of the service, the holiest service in the temple, which is the service of Yom Kippur. So when you got two of these really blockbuster Torah portions, and they're usually linked, something is often going to get lost in the mix. So that is what makes this opportunity special, that we get to give each one of these Torah portions its own time and attention. And so Parshat Kedoshim, and the Parsha opens up with really, and we've discussed this, I think, briefly in years past, in passing, but I would like to make a little bit of a focus of it in today's class. The opening directive of this week's Torah portion, the umbrella directive under which all these specifics that we talked about loving your fellow, being honest in business, respect to your parents, all fall under this general umbrella directive, is what Paula said earlier, is Kedoshim Tihiyu. Be holy, right? Be holy, right? Nike has just do it, right? And God has be holy. That's God's, in a sense, call to action, his slogan for us. Now, here's the thing. The Torah gives a reason why you have to be holy. Be holy because
I am holy.
Correct. It does not say be holy because it's the right thing to do, or be holy because that's what I created you for. Be holy because I am holy, which is puzzling in multiple different fashions. That doesn't seem to validate holiness, right? Wear a red shirt because I wear a red shirt. Why is that a validation?
You're part of me. You're
Well, Jerry, let me set up the question. I want to make the question. Your answers are too good, and it steals the thunder from the question because
she's really good.
Right. No. You're right. But let me first flesh out the question. Be holy because I am holy doesn't seem to be a valid reason. It doesn't add an explanation, substance to why being holy is the thing to do. right? Just because somebody else is doing it doesn't mean you should be doing it, right? That's what every parent has told their child. If everybody else in your class is going to jump off the roof, you're going to jump off the roof, right? We've all used some version of that when our child has, or somebody we know has done something foolish, and their explanation is, well, everybody was doing it, right? That's not a reason. Just because somebody else is doing it, just because somebody else is this thing, doesn't automatically make it the thing that you're supposed to do. Tell me why it's a good thing, or explain why it's a good thing, and then why that person's doing it. If you explain why that person's doing it, then that could be a valid reason. Kedoshim to you, ki kadosh ani, is in and of itself not an explanation. Taking it a step further, almost kind of the opposite end of it, is that being holy because God is holy is a bridge too far. We are not God. We really can't be God in pretty much anything else that defines God. Be infinite because God is infinite. Be the King of Kings because God is the King of Kings. In other words, this is be holy because God is holy. I can't be like God in any other way. So why all of a sudden am I being like God in this one? God is God and I am me. What's good for God is not necessarily good for me. God is holy, of course he's holy, but why does that mean that I have to be holy? I'm not God. In other words, this explanation for multiple reasons is not an explanation at all.
But it goes to the nature of the relationship, doesn't it?
Okay, so good. Let's start answering. So first, Jerry said something, and we'll get back to what Jerry said. But go ahead, Paula.
Okay.
Go explain what you were saying.
Simply that if we have a spark of the divine inside of us, that's what we should be trying to make a connection based on. I don't know. It's very hard for me to talk about Hashem this way. I can talk about my husband. Okay.
By the way, there are times where God is referred to as our spouse.
Exactly.
So talk about your husband.
No, because we're the feminine. We're the feminine to God's masculine. I love
There
it.
you go.
So
There
talk
you
about your husband.
I believe that after 50 years of marriage, I've got a spark of him inside of me. He's got a spark of me inside of him. I am not him. He is not me. But we are together working towards perfection. I'll put it that way.
All right. Well said. Well said. But I am going to take it a little bit further than you're comfortable with going. Okay.
Please.
And so let's start looking at this, because here's the bottom line. I think what everybody's going, both Jerry and Paul are kind of saying, is that yes, well, while we can't be God, we're kind of expected to emulate God because we do have the ability, and more on this in a moment. But that only makes the first question now a little bit stronger. Why is the particular thing that we are meant to emulate God in his holiness, in his being holy? Be holy because I'm holy. God doesn't say, be loving because I am loving. God, or be strong because I am strong. Or be a leader because I am a leader.
Yeah, well, those things are implied.
Yes and no. But the fact is we don't lay it out. In other words, there are times where the Torah says be strong, be kind, but the Torah gives a reason for them. Not just saying because in this you emulate me. So it's interesting that specifically about holiness, specifically about our pursuit of holiness, God says the reason to do so is because I am holy. In other words, not because it's intrinsically right or correct or right. It's because this of all things. And the flip side of this is in all the ways I want you to emulate me, the way that I want you to emulate me is in my holiness. In other words, your strength is not necessarily going to be similar to my strength. Your kindness might be different than my kindness, but your holiness needs to emulate my holiness.
Now I see where you're going. Good.
That's a very important point.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Very important. And let's start unpacking what this is. Each and every one of us, to a certain degree, are expected to define kindness in our own way, and to be kind in a unique way. My kindness is going to look different than your kindness, etc., etc. And to a certain degree, in this, God says, follow your own understanding, because I'm going to give you the general reason why kindness is the right thing. And in your knowledge of that, now go pursue kindness. Go pursue being a kind person. I'm going to give you the general reason why strength is a good thing, and now you're going to go pursue your strength. But in holiness, I don't put that into your jurisdiction. Be holy in the way that I am holy. Holiness is a different thing. Holiness is what makes you not a good person, not a proper person, not an adroit person, not a productive person. Holiness is what makes you a transcendental person, an elevated person, a godly person. That, God says, you need to follow my cues. Allow me to say this in more basic terms. We don't define morality. God does.
Right. Right.
We don't define what is righteous. God does. And that's very important. That is very, very important. Because the arbiter and judge of morality needs to be above each one of us and our predispositions, each one of us and our own sentimentalities, each one of us and our own subjective perspectives. You had a lot of things done in the name of morality throughout history. Some we still consider very good. Some we consider heinous and horrible. The Aztecs thought it was the most moral thing to do to sacrifice somebody's heart every day in order to make the sun come up, because if not, the sun won't come up. Darwinists believe that the moral thing to do is to cull the herd, to learn from the laws of the jungle, and to pursue survival of the fittest. It's the moral thing to do. That protects the viability of the species. Holiness is not placed in our hands. Holiness does not get defined by human beings. Holiness gets defined by God. Now here's the thing. Fine. So what falls under the rubric of holiness? Fine. If you're saying, okay, so whatever it is that's in the pursuit of holiness, that fine, that gets defined by God. We'll define everything else. Here's the little secret. What follows under the rubric of holiness? Pretty much everything.
Oh, that's the trick.
Including the respect you have to show to your parents, a proper approach to your civil and business life, the way you serve God, the way you're a good citizen, the way you develop and cherish friendships. All that we are doing as human beings, not as a sophisticated animal. We are doing as godly beings. And so we need to do it in a godly way. Even when we do business, we don't do it. We do not pursue our business with a social contract. We pursue our business with a divine contract. there are going to be elements of business that Judaism is going to demand of you, including, for example, the necessity to give 10% to charity. The idea that that you must not charge an exceeding amount for an object, even if the buyer is willing to pay it. The idea that you must, according to halacha, offer your neighbor to buy a parcel of land before you offer it to the general market. These are not things that social contracts would demand of you. It would be unfair for a social contract to demand. If there wasn't altruism injected into the process, these would not make sense. But Judaism demands altruism because in your business you are pursuing being holy, not just pursuing being fair or just. You are pursuing being holy. And who defines what is holy? God does. And so to a certain degree, there is a very powerful message in the beginning of the Parsha. And it is because it is what it is in the way the Parsha frames it. The Torah does not say pursue holiness. The verse does not say pursue holiness. As one of the things, you should pursue business, you should compartmentalize your pursuit of holiness. And in that, emulate God. It doesn't say that. What does it say?
Kedoshim to you.
Be holy. Be holy. Kedoshim to you. This has to be your identity in everything you do. In other words, this has to be the common denominator, the common thread in everything you do, in your business, in the way you eat and drink, in the personal relationships, in your interfamilial relationships, in your relationship with God, etc., etc. Be holy. And what defines holiness? What defines holiness is what God says, define as holy.
But when there's a conflict, when I'll put it a different way, where does self-preservation come into this?
Self-preservation is a very key aspect in Judaism. Judaism says, not only shall you preserve yourself, ushmartem me'od al nafshotechem.
A lot.
Self-preservation is one of the foremost mitzvahs that a person has, simply because even in the same framework, God says, I invested a piece of me into you. Treat that with respect. Treat it with concern, with solicitousness. As Hillel said, Im eina mili, you need to be the one who takes care of yourself, that spark. If you had true respect for that piece of God, for that holy spark within you, then you would be doing everything within your power to preserve it. And you understand that while the two of us are walking through a desert, right? And there's one skin of water in my possession, it's only enough to make one of us.
Right.
Get one of us to yourself. That you have to take it for yourself. Right. And that's not because
but when it conflicts directly with a positive commandment, and Sudi, excuse me, because you and I have discussed this a lot. I've got a positive commandment that says honor your mother and father so that because if you do, you'll have a long life. And your parents are oppressive, abusive. Where is the line for self-preservation and honoring? How do you live like that?
Well, there are different ways to honor.
So the answer is, Paula, the Torah is black and white, but life isn't.
Thank you.
and that's a very important point to understand. And in the Torah speaks to that tension. Yaakov got the blessings by engaging in less than honest behavior to his own father. And it was not wrong. Because life's not black and white. His brother sold him the birthright. So fair and square, he should have been able to go in and take it. Then his brother reneged on the deal. So now what? Now does he just walk away or he understands that this deal, this blessing, this, it's not a blessing, this birthright, this obligation to be the Jewish people, which his brother would not do,
Right.
has to be in his hands. Yaakov knows this. And it's not so much the ends justify the means, but the world is messy. And so sometimes it's not going to be a clean plug-in, as it were. In this case, the solution in your instance would look different than the solution to somebody else's. So maybe the way you honor your parents is by giving them space.
And Judaism is fine with this.
Absolutely. That is why Judaism demands that you have living, breathing rabbanim, mentors, spiritual guides and mentors. That you can't just go to the black and white of the Torah and say, I'm going to be able to know everything in every situation or circumstance. Because the Torah understands that the Torah is eternal, but each situation is circumstantial. And how to plug the Torah into this circumstance is not necessarily going to be such an easy understanding. And oftentimes a rabbi will get it right, and oftentimes a rabbi will get it wrong. And so the Torah knows with the fallibility of rabbis or mentors, not just rabbis, but it says asay lecha rav, right?
Right, right.
And acquire. Make for yourself a rav, which makes the point that sometimes they're not in that official position and you're just adopting, but you are creating this person into that position for you, because it works. This person works as a mentor. And in the case this rav does not mean just rabbinical authority, it means a mentor, a spiritual mentor. Knei lecha chaver means a spiritual journeyman alongside you, somebody who is going to march on this journey alongside you, that can bolster you, you can bolster them, etc., etc. Bottom line is but that does not change the absolute truth that what is the North Star, what is the guiding light in any of the decisions is this point, Kedoshim to you, ki kadosh ani. The Christians have it correct, but they just got the wrong guy. It's not WWJD, right? It's WWHS. What would Hashem say? And we try our best to understand this at times. And if you think about it, to a certain degree, our tenacious hold on this idea that no matter what the modern sentiment is at any given point in history, the contemporary sentiment at any given point in history, we did not measure our values based on what society considered valuable and right and correct and moral and righteous at the time, but based on what the Torah said, is the reason that we have been able to preserve who we are and preserve our culture and our heritage all the way through. And I make this point often. And I say, this is what really scares me about many modern pseudo authorities on Judaism of the modern era, in which they are so quick to throw out the parts of the Torah that do not conform with modern day perspectives on what's right and wrong. And they preserve and they hold up and they're very proud of the parts of the Torah that does conform. So they treat the Torah like a Chinese buffet. And they say, this stuff is out. We'll remove this from the platform because it's wrong, because the Torah is outdated, because the Torah is wrong about these things. Or even if the Torah is not wrong, but let's tone that down and focus more on this stuff, because this stuff is really, I mean, all of society can get behind these ideas. And I'm sorry if I'm sounding critical and cynical.
Am I supposed to pitch you the orange on the Seder table?
Right, right. And I'm not going to go there with that specific thing because that's its own. But I want to make a point. Imagine, and you might have heard this from me before, but this does bear repeating in this context. Imagine the rabbis of the Roman era applied the same general principles, right? The Romans were the enlightened of their time. They were the most advanced, progressive, and enlightened of their era. Right? Everybody else were barbarians. What would happen if the rabbis had applied the same general litmus test that many today are applying? And they say, in the days of the Romans, let's do away with the parts of the Torah that don't conform with modern sentiment about what's right and wrong. And let's just take the stuff. So we'll erase that, and we won't teach that to our children, and we'll kind of take that off our platform. And we'll just stick with the stuff that modern society, progressive, enlightened society, can get behind. You know what they would have done away with? They would have done away with all the stuff that modern day rabbis really love about them. All of it. Tacitus, who was a very famous Roman historian, to the point where we get the word tacit from his name. Tacitus wrote about the Jews, that he doesn't get these backward people. They're not with the times. They have this weird idea, for example, about human rights. He writes, he says that there's this weird notion that a child has their own inviolable rights. They don't believe in patria potestas, which means father owns all. That everything in the household is really the property of the father, which in their mind is so backward because that's chaos. The father has to run the household so the household runs smoothly and correctly, and the father is the breadwinner, and so on and so forth. And so the father should be, and that to them was enlightened thinking. The idea, for example, that if the mother dies, right, and the child and the society, this is the Jewish idea, the society deems that it is unhealthy for the child to remain in the household of the father. The father, for whatever reason, doesn't necessarily mean the father's an evil guy, but he's just not up to caring for the child. The society, the Bet Din, can, for the sake of the child, the well-being of the child, remove the child from the custody of the father and place them in the care of an aunt or someone of the like. And Tacitus writes, how foreign and strange of an idea this is. Today, we are so proud of the fact that the Torah sees this. But what would have happened if the rabbis would have had the rabbis back then would have had the approach to the Torah that modern, quote unquote, Jewish intellectuals have, which is that Torah needs to conform. With the parts of Torah that conform, we'll hold those up. But the stuff that we think that the Torah's got outdated or outmoded, we would get rid of. They would have gotten rid of all these ideas of civil rights, social rights, humanitarian, and they would have left in animal sacrifice, because that's what the Romans were doing. And the parts of the Torah that talks about fighting a war, right? And taking your enemies and making them slaves, that stuff, they would have left in. So they would have edited out all the stuff in the Torah that everybody loves today. They would have left in all the stuff that people are ticklish about today. So you can imagine, and how long would it take for Torah to disappear completely with that general attitude?
Mm.
What has kept the Torah, and by the way, us, therefore, existing, thriving, in whatever circumstance on earth, is because our understanding that righteousness is not defined by us, but by God. Certain things we're going to get, certain things we're not. But God created us. God is the one who created the very concept of right and wrong. God created the concept of right and wrong. Right and wrong are only objective in the fact that God removed them from our hands. That's what makes them objective. Not because they're inherently objective. The proof of that is the fact that the animal kingdom has a very different version of what's right and wrong. Most creatures on this planet don't have the same understanding of what's right and wrong. What makes right and wrong objective is the fact that it's in the hands of God, not in human hands. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't feel a sense of passion and excitement when this particular aspect I can also see in front of my eyes, how it does have a natural goodness in the world. It has a manifest goodness to the world. That's not a problem. In fact, the Rambam oftentimes, even in the mitzvot known as chukim, the mitzvot known as the mitzvot that we do simply because God said so, even there he tried to add a reason. And not saying it's the reason, but a reason for this particular thing, be it kosher, whatever it was, and by thereby allowing for our kind of our kishkis to be excited about doing it as well. We shouldn't have to do it simply with a sense of faith and subservience, but we should also be able to be excited about it. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as we understand that these are these are the structures built on the primary foundation of us doing this and us saying, why is this holy? Why is this righteous? Because God defined it as such.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So it has to do with the children, and now they're saying that the teachers can give the children shots, but that, or they can take the kids away if they don't comply, the parents. So how does that fit into how our religion in terms of what we believe?
Correct. So for the most part, not saying I'm not going to come down as to whether the Torah agrees with this or disagrees with this, just a general principle. But that is why. That has been what's preserved us, because we see in the span of a couple of years the vicissitudes of what's right and wrong has changed sometimes 180 degrees, right? Some say that's a very good thing, that we can quickly make a change. How long ago was it that the majority of all human beings, all Americans rather, saw abortion as a bad thing? How quickly that changed to know, and how quickly that might change back, and it doesn't, and gay marriage in, out. The bottom line is the common denominator in all of this is not whether one particular thing is right or wrong, but how fickle our subjective perspective is, and how left in our hands. I hate to say this, and they always say that in a debate, there's anybody knows, they call it the Nazi rule or the Hitler rule.
Uh-huh.
The first one to invoke the Nazis or Hitler in a debate loses automatically, because you've just gone to the hyperbolic. Once you've done that, if you can't stand, with methodical and more down to earth arguments, if you can't make your case that you had to go to Hitler or to the Nazis, then automatically you've academically lost the debate. There's such a rule, and as a general principle, I agree with that. Don't make your point without engaging in hyperbole and invoking the Nazis. But I don't think I'm debating anybody here, so I'm going to make a point.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Just surprised?
No. Say you might, if you're going to challenge me, then it becomes a debate. Then I can't use the Nazi example.
He can't tell.
Go ahead. Stuart.
Here's what I'm having more than a little trouble with on this. God says you will be holy like me. So the standard of holiness is God's standard, not human standard. I understand that. So where does he show us the holiness? Where does he lay out what it is we're supposed to do to be holy like him?
Well, 613 times.
I'm asking him. If you don't mind.
No. So interestingly enough, so Jerry is right in general, but in more specific, immediately God follows that up with, that's why this parsha is such an important parsha.
Okay, but there are laws that evolve in this parsha. Are those the laws that are to be obeyed to be holy like him?
Oh, I see.
Yes,
or not?
yes, but Yes, but not limited to them. In other words, there is these ones that come immediately as part of the definition of what God, right, of that statement, of the qualification of that statement. God says, be holy, right? Somebody says, do the right thing, and then lists a couple things, and you understand that that's what that general rule is now being defined by these specifics, right? In fact, that is a Jewish rule of exegesis, of logical inference, that when you have a general rule immediately followed by specifics, then those specifics are defining that rule. So yes, when the Torah says be holy, and then it says a whole bunch of specifics, those specifics are, now, is it limited to just these? Or
Necessary
are
but not sufficient.
are necessary but not exclusive?
All right, fair enough. Fair enough.
In other words, these set the tone and the tenor and give us a general framework. These specifics create the framework in which, at the end of the day, all 613 fall into. Why these, and there's many, many commentaries as to why these particular mitzvot of the 613 have been singled out to define holiness, right? When, as Jerry said, all 613 mitzvahs are mandated by God in our as what we are doing to pursue being holy Jews, right? But these specific ones were singled out, similarly to the fact that the 10 commandments include 10 mitzvot, but that's not the entirety of the Torah. So what are these 10 vis-a-vis the rest? And what are these listed in this parsha, this Torah portion, in being God's qualifiers to be holy vis-a-vis the rest of them? There's plenty of ink spilled on this. But yes, definitively, God doesn't just leave it saying, be holy, for I'm holy, now go figure it out. God immediately gets specific and starts to define. And of them is what I was just talking about. Love your fellow as you love yourself, have fair measurements, have awe for your parents. Now, see, for example, that, right? If you had left being holy and righteous in the hands of an individual and not in God, you say, wait a minute, these are all intuitive, really? Having awe for your parents is intuitive? Go talk to the modern child today about whether they feel they need to have
Not in
awe,
my case.
right?
Thank you.
This whole generation doesn't believe. This whole generation believes that the respect has to go in the other direction, right?
Yeah, that's
Parents need
true.
to respect the youth, the future, right? The older
That's true.
generation they're in the past. Just do away with it. I want to tell you something. If there's one prejudice that is ubiquitous in modern society more than any other prejudice, it's ageism. And ageism is a real issue. It's a very, very dangerous issue because it has made our society, everywhere in society right now, at best, older people, at worst, they're being portrayed as bumbling, you know, addled individuals that don't deserve any respect or even attention. At best, they are being portrayed as cases that, because you have to have compassion on these cases, on these older people. You have to show them mercy and compassion. What happened to the idea that to every older person there's the yes sir and yes ma'am, and there's gravitas and experience, and you should seek them out as mentors and counselors?
Because
Today we
those
look,
children haven't seen the history that we've come from, I think. They don't give any
But
credit to anything that we've seen and what we're doing, I feel.
but Diane, you're right, but it's not limited to that because it doesn't make a difference what specific history. A older person in general deserves your awe and respect. They've lived longer on planet Earth, and the Torah says as a general rule, Ein chacham kebalas nisyon, the greatest source of wisdom is experience.
But
No,
they disdain to that's
that's
old.
my point.
Yeah.
That's exactly my point. And this is what the Torah says. This is objective truth, whether society agrees with it or not. A person has to have awe for their parents. Even, by the way, the Torah does not say, and I hate to say this because this is going to ruffle some feathers here, even parents that were not really good parents.
Well, I can see that because some people who were not good parents, so to speak, from the child or whatever, don't always know what's right or don't have the ability to do more. But what I question is, like you said about taking the children and giving them a shot, could that be considered a religious exemption? That
No, again, I don't want to get specific with that because
No, but-
first of all, no, what I mean to say is, but that's the point. Um, uh, the Torah is not going to make its determinations based on modern sentiment.
Mm.
The Torah is defining inherent objective rights and wrongs, and it is our job to plug the choices that are available to us at any given time into the Torah's machinery, not Torah into the world's machinery. Rather, and this has worked for us, and the proof is in the pudding. If you're going to say, Rabbi, that's a nice sentiment, but I don't believe the viability of that. I'm going to say, really,
I think they're
is
taking it
3,000
away.
years,
Mhm.
3,000 years, a good enough litmus test? The
I
fact
agree
is,
with you, but I don't think that that's occurring these days. I
no,
don't.
Diane, without a doubt.
Okay, if I may,
This is why I'm
if I
railing on the
may,
subject.
look at the way the rabbi's children treat him. I rest my case.
Mm-mm.
It's happening today.
No, but,
Okay, you don't have to say it, Rabbi.
right, no, but I do want to, on that point.
I agree with you. That's not where I
On
go.
that point, for example, we have a very quote unquote old fashioned sense of proprietary behavior between the genders, right? All of you know I don't shake women's hands, which leads to multiple awkward moments daily. And I want to tell you something. The one thing that I take Chabad to task for is Chabad is really good at framing, you know, one-line explanations for things. And every Chabad rabbi is in this awkward moment multiple times a day, and we still haven't synthesized a one-liner
I
that is like the
know.
perfect
I
response
know.
for that moment.
You
My
know,
father-
I had a moment in California, like an idiot. I put my hand out to I mean, like me of all people, and people were standing around, and he goes, "Jerry, you know better than that."
Right.
And I was thinking, that's not good. Like he really embarrassed me. Like that's on the list of like very embarrassing.
Right.
You
I
know.
want to tell you something. Here's just to make you feel better. I had it where I stuck my hand out to female members of the congregation because I'm like, my mind's somewhere else, and I'm going around and shaking hands, and they'll look at me and they'll say, "Rabbi, you know better."
There you go.
But
Okay,
what
now
my
I
point
feel
is-
better.
Yeah. No, my father's line, by the way, and we're totally off on a tangent here, but my father's line in that circumstance is he says, listen, the last woman whose hand I shook, I ended up marrying. So,
That's
We had a
very
debate.
good.
We had a debate in our family about this issue with shaking hands. And in Israel, where I grew up, some rabbis decide that it's better, like it's preferable to shake the hand of someone coming to shake your hand to not embarrass him than to do the mitzvah of like keeping not shaking hands of women. So it's we were
Right,
wondering,
and I want to tell you
like,
something.
is it like Al Talbin Pnei Adam Berabim or something
Right,
like that,
very
or
good.
like what's better?
So this is kind of
Who
like,
values conflict, and then who decides?
yes,
Right.
no. So this is exactly so. This is a very similar situation to the circumstance that Paula presented, right? Torah is black and white, but life isn't, right? Torah says you're not allowed to embarrass somebody, you're not. And Torah says that on the other hand, you have to be very careful with modesty. So, but what happens when life kind of slams the two together where it's an either or proposition? That is exactly one of the reasons why Torah always maintains a dynamic element of saying consult living, breathing individuals who will use the Torah and the fundamentals of the Torah. See, I can respect that rabbi if they're doing it based on truly on them trying to say what is the correct way to execute on the Torah's position on this. If they're doing it not because they're trying to be with the times and be all modern, the Torah does not need modernization. That's the kind of the perhaps the one line conclusion to this is the Torah is eternal. The Torah is not a classic. Anytime you see, and I hope that to impress on you, maybe you yourselves could start pushing back when somebody refers to Scripture, right, as the classic texts, right? You hear it, like it says in the classic text. No, very bad choice of words. The Torah is not a classic. Huckleberry Finn is a classic.
Is a classic.
Torah is not a classic. A classic means it was written by a fallible human being with a limited ability. So, and what is unique about it is that even though this person, a limited human being, wrote a limited volume, it has managed to have an outsized influence past its particular contemporary era, and it still reverberates, right? But with the understanding that it was far more contemporary back in the day, far more relevant, it still manages to maintain a relevancy. It is standing the test of time, is the kind of the famous litmus test of a classic. Does it stand the test of time? Eternal means that it is completely above the concept of time. It means as relevant as it was 3,000 years ago is as relevant as it is today, is as relevant as it will be in 3,000 years. The Torah does not need modernization. Having said that, the Torah does need adaptation. Not that the Torah needs to be adapted to modern times, but you need to adapt modern times to Torah. We've now harnessed electricity in a way that we never did before. How do I plug that into the do's and don'ts of Shabbat? What's changed is not the Torah. What's changed is modern circumstances. I plug that into Torah. How do I, so to your point, Tahel, now that handshakes are considered by society as run of the mill, there's nothing, right? A man touching a woman's hand, we can imagine a couple, you just have to go back 200 years ago to where if one strange man touched a strange woman's hand, that was
Had to get
completely
married.
improper, right?
They
So-
had to get married.
So society has changed, right? The Torah has not.
But
But-
what about the laws that have changed? We would be hurt by those laws in terms of, that's what we knew, or that's what, like, for instance, women, or what you're talking about, abortion. It's a lot of things that have becoming laws. Like, women are not really just
Right, so
birthing very
Diane, you
well,
keep on wanting me to comment on secular law and whether it's
how
right or
do
wrong.
we live?
My
We're
argument
supposed
is-
to adapt to the Torah is what I'm getting.
So the answer is, and there is a point where in the Torah, there is the principle of Dina de Malchuta Dina. The law of the
Oh,
land
yeah,
is the
I
law.
used to know that by heart.
Yes.
I didn't hear what he
The
said.
law-
Dina de
the law-
Malchuta Dina.
The law of the land is the law. That to a certain degree, unless it is in a circumstance where it's in direct violation of Torah, because there is sometimes indirect violation of Torah, which then comes to be a question and a conflict. For example, similar to what Tahel just brought up, where you have two principles in Torah and the circumstance has them slamming together. Modesty versus embarrassment.
Albanat panim.
And here you have the law of the land in which I live in the United States versus something that is not necessarily a direct conflict, but an indirect conflict. For example, we know that the Torah says that same-gender marriage is prohibited. Same-gender marriage is prohibited in accordance with the Torah law. Doesn't mean that I have to go out and be a zealot and start breaking up all those marriages.
No.
But what happens in a circumstance where, as a matter of courtesy, I have to address a letter Mr. and Mr., right? Because the law of the land is that this is considered a marriage now, right? How do I navigate that? It's sometimes messy. It's sometimes not an easy answer. You'll have one rabbi that says, come down this way, and one rabbi will come down that way. You're bringing up a point, Diane, right? Torah says the law of the land is the law. Then there's another concept of that you have to preserve your life at all costs, right? Now, what happens if your understanding of these vaccines or inoculations that they're bad? Somebody else will have the exact opposite understanding, that to not have the vaccine is bad. And so you'll have rabbinical authorities, and there is a raging debate in Israel. There's a raging debate. Many rabbis are getting behind the government's mandate, vaccine mandate, that say that in fact that is the fulfillment of the Torah's demand, ushmartem ma'od, you have to preserve your life. And there are other rabbis that say that actually making it a mandate is a violation of that. There's for every Hillel there's a Shammai, and for every Shammai there's a Hillel. And each one is going to say the execution of this particular mitzvah is this way, and the execution of this mitzvah is that way. That's not the principle here. Oftentimes, in practicality, I'm not giving you much guidance in the way of practicality, because practicality can be very messy. As I said, I'm not saying that to get the vaccine is a fulfillment of the Torah, or not getting the vaccine is a fulfillment of the Torah. That's what I'm saying. I'm not weighing in on that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that our general attitude and philosophy, this is more a philosophical point, is that in our pursuit of what is right and wrong, the litmus test is not society. It's not even my own. It's not even my own sensibilities. It's what God in the Torah lays out. And there's a guarantee that it's not all of it's going to sit well with you. Otherwise, God would just say, be holy because it's the right thing to do. And so whatever makes you feel right is the way to go. God understands that there's going to be times where your sensibilities are not going to be comfortable with it. And that is, God is setting it up. And he's saying, Kedoshim to you, ki kadosh ani. Now, what is beautiful is that for the most part, when you go look through the list that's in this week's Parsha, your sentimentality can get behind the vast majority, if not all of them. And by the way, part of that is because society has evolved today to uphold Judeo-Christian values. We are living in the first time in history, where the majority of the quote unquote modern world upholds the Judeo-Christian value system, which, as we said, is really Judeo value system, as the universal ethical code. It wasn't like this, right? Again, recency bias, you can say, oh, secular society, and fine. But let's zoom out and take in time, history, not in decades, in snippets of decades, but in snippets of centuries and millennia. There has never been a period in history where the ethical code of society has matched up so seamlessly with the ethical code of Torah. And that didn't happen by accident. That happened because we have been, for the past couple thousand years, a light unto nations. And the fact that we have resisted the urge to conform to society, but rather to lead society and to show society what the Torah defines as right and wrong. We have done this unbending for thousands of years. And the result has been that over the course of history, inexorably society has come to see the value system put forward in Torah as the most definitive, and say they won't necessarily consider it the perfect. They won't be doing it perfectly, but the most definitive system of morals and ethics that has been adopted by society, and they say it. The West has adopted Judeo-Christian values. And we know this to be Judeo values because there really is nothing put forward in the New Testament that is not borrowed from the Old Testament. The bottom line is that we, as the Jewish people, have been true to this directive over the course of millennia, through hell and high water and persecution and annihilation, oftentimes because of our views. As Haman told Achashverosh, as the main reason for annihilation, the main reason, justification for the annihilation of an entire race of people within his kingdom. What does Achashverosh say to Haman? What does Haman say to Achashverosh? V'datehem shonot mikol am. Their value system is different than that of all the other nations. And for that reason, they should be threatened with annihilation. And the Jewish people did not back down when it costed them more than just their invitation to the cocktail party. When they're sticking to the value system of the Torah, it would cost them their entire existence. They did not back down. Not then, not in the Hanukkah story, not in the Roman conquering, not going forward in the Spanish Inquisition, where all the Jews had to do was agree to convert to Christianity, and then they would have been able to live a nice, cushy life. Not during communist Russia, where all they had to do is forsake their Judaism and become good party apparatchiks. Never in history, when we were faced with this demand of abandon your version of righteousness to accept our version of righteousness, we've always responded, we define righteousness by what God defines as righteousness. We define holiness as what God defines as holiness, and we will never change our value system. And the result has been that 3,000 years later, the world has basically come to has learned from the light unto nations that we have been. Diane, I will acknowledge they have still a long way to go. But here is going to be a shameless plug. But if you want to see how close they have come, this upcoming JLI course, starting on May 17th, Tuesdays at 7:30 p.m., is going to be about the moral underpinnings of the Jewish legal system.
I was going to ask you, why hadn't I heard about another JLI course? Because I'm getting local.
This is, if you are
What's the
somebody who
JLI
is
stands for?
Jewish Learning
Why
Institute.
don't I get your emails? I don't know. Okay,
I don't
go
know.
ahead.
Well, good luck in trying to register. You may have a very narrow, very thin class. I went through your registration and kept hitting brick walls.
Okay, so then I'm happy that you told me that. If in fact, if you don't mind staying on after the class and tell me in specific where you have the problem, I will try to address it. Because of course, Stuart, we want to make it as easy and seamless as possible. So I would like to be able to address that. So
It was a breeze for me. It
it
went
could be,
through without
part of
a
it is that the trying to go in from multiple different places, whatever it is, there's
okay.
multiple entry points and they could be throwing it off. But either way, very important JLI class, because it's really going to be a fascinating exploration of exactly this, of the principles and values that underpin Jewish law, that makes Jewish law adaptable even to the modern day. So you have the, as we talked about, the Bet Din talking about ox goring cows, right? Translated into modern times, can I use my neighbor's Wi-Fi without asking their permission? The reason that halacha can definitively come down on this point is because of the universal value that underpins the law of the ox goring the cow and this law as well. And what it is, it's not only fascinating academically, it's inspiring because you will see how much of the moral and ethical system that underpins what's right and wrong today and across all nations really starts from the Torah. And for all those interested, this does grant you CLE credits. And even if you don't need the continuing education credits because you're not a lawyer or you're in a state like Maryland that doesn't need it, that in and of itself is fascinating that the American law system, the American bar, is basically saying that a course proving that the Jewish legal system is better than the secular legal system, we want you to learn that and we'll give you credit for having done so. They see value.
But does it, so I want, so for one thing, like birthing mothers, they no longer say that just women birth. I mean, I mean, it's like mind-boggling to me that, you know, we're birthing people. We're not females that give birth. That men can give birth too, you know, without the facts or whatever. They're saying that, and that you have to believe that, you know, it's like.
So
You
so
don't
here's what
have
I
to
will tell you,
believe it.
Diane. The course will explore comprehensively the values that I'm sure will bring you a sense of hope for humanity
That's what I want.
without wading into politics.
That would be good.
Because importantly, and we have to, in general, I think it is a responsibility for those that are espousing Torah to be very careful to not allow themselves to fall into opining on modern politics. The reason for that is because modern politics, I was just talking this about the one thing that I will opine about modern politics is about how destructive the conversation of modern politics has become because laws will change. Right? Somebody was telling me they had to leave their Thanksgiving dinner because of what their uncle was saying at the table. And I said to them, I said, listen, your politics in general, all these points, in 5 years from now will not even be on the radar.
No, I hope so.
That person's going to be your uncle forever.
Mm.
And so you have just destroyed something that is a relationship, a forever relationship, because of zeitgeist politics. That's a pity. Unfortunately, everything is being viewed through the lens of politics. Everything, music, art, friendships, family relationships. That is a big problem. And so I say that to a certain degree, make your points without involving politics, and it will be heard by more people and will have a little stronger and a more lasting impact. And you will also save yourself from alienating half of, because there is not a more sensitive and the point is, and what's unfortunate about it is purposeless conversation. Because the vast majority of us will have no influence on the politics one way or the other. The only thing we will have influence is on the relationships that we are putting into jeopardy because of the angst that we feel. So yes, we have to teach our values. We have to teach what we believe is right and wrong. We have to make decisions, and oftentimes the decisions will be based on the political mores of the time. But as much as possible, let's inoculate the conversation from politics and make it purely about the substance.
Yeah.
And that way we can try to keep our conversations as healthy as possible. You know, they say that if pro or con rather is the opposite of pro, then what is the opposite of progress?
Mm.
Congress.
Congress. And if you break down, poly means many, and ticks are blood-sucking insects.
Uh,
The bottom line is let's stick to the stuff that we're good at, the stuff that is healthy and wholesome. And as much as possible, let that be our point of conversation. And not, Diane, I indulge in a good political conversation as much as as the next person. But I think, as you'll see, that I try very much to make sure that those those don't become the theme of conversations in the shul, because it's so much more important to share a message and not allow it to get lost in political rancor. On that note, everybody should have a wonderful Shabbos. Stuart will help me figure out why it is not easy to log
Sign up for the
sign up
JLI.
for JLI. And
You just
everybody
go, I
should
think maybe you just go to the JLI site and put in your
zip code. Right,
zip code.
you can circumvent
Wait, what's your zip code again?
20817.
Yeah. Okay.
But either way, sign up whether here or anywhere else for the JLI course, because it's very good.
Problem,
As always, but
problem
this is, I think, particularly relevant and stuff that is very actionable by default. Yeah, lots of other good stuff coming down the pike. But otherwise,
Thank
everybody,
you, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you.
a good
Shabbat
job.
shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom and
Thank
Chag
you.
Sameach.
Thank
That's
you.
right. That's right. That's right. Oh, Paula wants us to make sure that we do mention that today is a special day. Today is the day the state of Israel came into being, and all of us owe an incredible debt of gratitude to all those, because even if you're a Jew in the diaspora, Israel is the home of millions of our brethren, and it is always our home, and it being there and being a force among the nations is an incredible boon to not just the Jews living there, but the Jews living around the world, and honestly, the world entire. And everybody should take note of this. So thank you, Paula, for bringing that up. And
Yes.
and yes, may we always share that incredibly symbiotic relationship between our Holy Land, no matter where we exist in the diaspora.
Yes, agree. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye, Rabbi. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All the best, everybody. Kol tov.
okay. Rabbi,
Yes.
I'm
no
gonna go on.
problem, because I don't know how to keep this window open while I search for your registration. Your